Hey guys, welcome back. This is probably the video that I least am looking forward to because we're trying to do this in one take, which means that our hero has to make all these measurements and all these cuts absolutely perfect. Today what we're going to do is we're going to cut out our mat board. If you remembered the other day, I was looking at the mat boards and deciding, do I go with white, do I go with black? And I think what I decided to do was to cut it so that I have a black liner on a white field. So take a walk with me over here. If you remember the other day, I said, which way do you want to go with this? I really like the black. The white I actually thought looked a lot better than originally. But the conclusion that I came out with, what looks the best, and one of those things where you want to make sure you get what you want because it is like Burger King. I'm going to have a black liner with a white mat, which is going to give me a cherry frame on the outside. I think that works best for me. So I have to make some changes here. This white measurement of the mat board will stay the same. If you look here, when I figured this whole thing out, I said I wanted an inside opening of 16.5 by 22. And that's what I figured out on my mat board, that the inside opening that I'm going to cut out on the mat board will be 16.5 inches wide. It's going to be 22 inches long. And then I also figured out that I want an 1.25 inch mat. So I don't want a huge mat on this because the picture is big in and of itself. But I'm going to have an 1.25 inch here and an 1.25 inch here. What I do have to change is this inside measurement because what I'm going to do is put that black liner. I hope it works out. How big should that liner be? Well, here's the story. I've seen many that are really, really narrow, and I've seen some that are wide. And the thing that doesn't look good is if it's a wide liner with an outside mat board, it almost looks like there's two separate mats on it. I want the liner to kind of outline the outside of that poster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a 1/4 inch liner, a 1/4 inch difference between this inside mat and the other mat that I'm going to put in, this one. So I have a choice. I could make the outside smaller, or I could make it a little bit cut inside on the mat on the inside. And that's what I'm going to choose to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the black liner to be not 16.5. I'm going to make that 16 inches on the inside. And I'm not going to make it 22 inches long inside. I'm going to make it 21.5, which means instead of the liner on the black liner to be 16.5 by 22, I'm going to make it smaller so it fits more of the picture, 16 by 21.5. These words have never rung more true. The thinking is the hard part. So on this, there's an awful lot of mind work on it and very little of cutting or, I shouldn't say measuring, plenty of measuring, but cutting and actually doing this. So what we're going to try to do is try to make this so this works out. First time, one shot, we're going to give it a go of it. So my inside liner is going to be 16 by 21.5. And I'll probably be asking you guys that measurement. You know what I'll do? I should really write it down. 16 by 21.5, which means my inside measurement or my matted board isn't going to be 1.25 inches. It's going to be actually 1.5 inches wide, and then the 1.25 inches will sit back, and that'll be the white one. Have I confused you enough? Let's just go to the mat board and see if we can't do this right. Number one, I need a pencil. Number two, I need like maybe 5 pair of glasses on this one. Number three, Something that I have already done that I didn't share with you. I cut this piece of mat board to the same measurement as the cardboard liner that I cut in the other video. To do that, you can do it one of two ways. If you think you're accurate enough, you could use a utility knife, or like I actually cut that mat board on the table saw because the table saw has a fence, and I know that that cut's gonna be straighter than whatever I could cut out. So what I did was went over there before this whole video started and make a cut. It was very similar to cutting out that cardboard. So if you have a question about how I did this, just look at that other video and you could see the cardboard is no different than the mat board. What's important is these are exactly the same size, which they are. One can't be larger than the other. Remember, we're only changing the inside measurements. The inside measurements of the mat only on the black liner is going to be smaller than it would be on the white field mat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the black liner. And this is important. Anytime you guys are cutting mat board, you're always marking it on the side that you don't want to see. Because if I put a line on the mat board and then I go to cut the mat board out and I see a pencil line, I have to get rid of that pencil line. So you're always marking on the side that you do not want to see. In this case, what I need to do is I need to cut this 1.5 inches. Remember, the white one that's going to go over top is going to be 1.25 inches. I want to mark out 1.5 inches around this whole entire perimeter to make a cut. I do have to draw lines on that. So I have to, number one, know how to measure, and number two, draw straight lines. And hopefully these squares are going to give me a hand. I'm not going to put on 2 pair of glasses. I'm going to put on 6 pair. No, I'm going to just put on, where am I? There it is. I knew I was getting ready for something. Here are my 2 pair of glasses. I'll address the mat. Hello, Matt. And I'll get a pencil, a tape measure, or a metal ruler. Now, this is either good or bad depending if you're the shop teacher or the student. There's so many times in the shop people need to use a flat metal, hard metal ruler to draw a measurement or take a measurement. They find out that, excuse me, with the tape measures have bend and give to it. But this is nice and solid. So what most people do is they take a combination square, they loosen up the nut on the combination square, pull this completely out. They can't put it back together. And then what you have is a whole collection of these. I don't like it. Just learn how to put this back. So if you can't get it to go back, just say, hey, teacher, tell me how this goes back. And it's a pretty easy thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set my combination square measurement here to 1.5 inches. So if you look at my metal rule on the combination square, I'm going to slide this bad boy over until I get to 1.5 inches. Well, there's 1.25. 1.5 should be right about there. That looks pretty accurate. I'm going to tighten that down. Let's see if I look in the light. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Let me move it over just a hair. That's pretty good. So there's a measurement of 1.5 inches. I'm going to go around this entire board and I'm going to put a mark at 1.5 inches. So I butt the combination square up against this end. I'm going to put a little mark there. Butt this up against here. I'm going to put a little mark here. I'm going to butt this up against here. I'm going to put a little mark here. Somebody said to me, how do you always make it look so easy? You know how many mistakes I've made with this in my life? Oh, Lord. And I am hoping and I am praying that this is not one of the days where I screw this up and you get to watch it on video. You get to save it for posterity. I'll go around this entire mat board because a critical mark that we have to make on this is where these corners intersect. So there's my marks at 1.25 inches. Remember, the white mat is going to be 1.25 inches. So the black mat will go past the white mat. Now what I'm going to do is take the combination square. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. butt this up against the mat board. And mat board is a great surface because it's hard enough. It's not like a piece of paper where it just gives. But what it allows me to do is actually put a square up against that end, and I can draw a line that's accurate, and it's held by the material itself. See how I'm marking each corner? Hey, you're not even looking. This is important. Oh, I'm just kidding. I can't see. I can't see what you're doing. Someone said to me, you should just shut up and just do it. But then you'd miss out on all these great jokes. I also got requests, and it could be in this video, to show you guys how to take my thumb off. Here's my backside mat that's already laid out. 1.5 inches, not 1.25 inches like I'm gonna have the other mat board, but 1.5 inches on all the corners. I used to do this by hand. I used to have a mat cutter. I would line up a straight edge. I would move it in about 1/4 inch and I would cut it. With a small mat, it was okay. You couldn't see a whole lot of mistakes. But the larger the mats became, the more difficult it became to draw a straight line and to cut a straight line. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this mat cutter. And we picked up one of these, and it was one of the best things I could have picked up. This mat board takes all the guesswork out of it, and it takes me as a human away from making a mistake, because all I have to really do is just line this up and then slide it down this guide, and I usually get a pretty straight line. The way this mat board or mat cutter works is that there's a cutter in here, and you notice that it's it almost looks like a blade on a utility knife. When I start to make this cut, and you can see that the blade doesn't come on the back side, but if I take this, put pressure on it, you notice that the guide, that little cut, that little notch that's in that little jig, allows the blade to come through. There's also a mark or a groove into the cutter. So when I bring this down, put pressure, it drops into the cutter and allows me to cut all the way through very accurately. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna see if I can't do this and not make a mistake. Let's give this a shot. I do need 2 pair of glasses, and I do apologize to you if that bothers you. Here's an important thing. This cutter is cutting the mat board at an angle. So what I want to keep in mind is that when I'm pulling this towards me, it's actually cutting a bevel on that back side. So what I want to make sure that I always do is that I want to start from a corner that I want the bevel to line up to. So if you look at this, if I place this in this cutter like this, push this down, it's going to cut the bevel on the inside, which is exactly what I want, into the black section that's on the back side. But here's the best part about this jig. If I lift up the hole down and I put my second pair of glasses on and I loosen both of these little knobs, there's a little thing that says read scale from this side. So I could line up the edge of the scale, and I can move it to the measurement that I want it to cut to. So if you look at this, if I place this here, the distance between the edge of my board and where the cutter is going to cut is going to be an inch in. If I move it to the yellow mark, it's 1.25 inches. If I move it to the green mark, it's 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches to that yellow cutter. I can move it to whatever I want. And you notice that they're angled so that when this slides, it automatically registers even with the cutter. It doesn't slide uneven. So that's the great thing about this. So remember, we said we want the black mat board to be 1.5 inches wide. I'm going to loosen the guide up, slide this over until I get to 1.5 inches, which is going to be right about there. I'm going to lock this in place by turning these knobs. And now I want to situate it so that this mat board gets cut at an angle. So I take it and I'm going to butt it up against the guide, drop down this little guide here. And if you notice, this might be off a little bit. You see how it lines up to the outside line? I'm a little bit off. I mean, I could slide that back a little bit if I wanted to, but I'm gonna leave it just like that. I think that it'll register itself. The other thing that will happen is, as I start to push this down and pull it back, there's a white line on the cutter itself. I want the white line to actually stop a little bit past the line that I drew. And there's an actual stop very similar to what we would use on the chop saw or the radial arm saw. I'm going to adjust that in place as well. So when I cut, the cutter will actually stop a little bit past the line. If I take it now is the important thing. I want to make sure that I turn it in a clockwise direction. And I'll line up, I'll see how this lines up. You see that I'm off consistently on these. So as long as I'm consistent, I'm gonna be fine. We'll give it a shot. I'll start with the long side first. I'll butt it up against the edge, drop this down, both pair of glasses on, and I'll see if I can't make my cut. Notice that the white line is going to line up with the mark that I have on my mat. I'll go a little bit further past there. And the best part about this is once I do this, this mat board really doesn't move. If I was cutting by myself, the mat board would slide all over, especially a piece of wood, a piece of mat board that's this size. So there's my cut. And let's just see how accurate I am at 1.5 inches. And that's pretty good at 1.5 inches. That's not bad. That's not bad. I'm going to turn it clockwise. And I'll make another cut. You can't do the outsides and then do the ends. You have to make sure that you're rotating this so that the bevel is on the black side, the opposite side. And this will make a lot more sense when we finish the mat cutting process. So I turn it again clockwise. The other thing that you're going to notice is that if you have a big poster like I do, you're going to have the middle section cut out that's large enough to do more pictures. So if I look at this, and it should cut straight out. Oh, please, baby. No, we don't want to tear out on the corner. Did that come out? Uh-oh. Let's see if I can salvage this. A tear out would be the worst. I'm just going to move that back a little bit. It was on the front side. I didn't go far enough on the front side. If you mess this up and you just tear it out, the corner looks awful. It's better to go past the corner like that. So if you look at this now, you can see that there's a white bevel liner on the black, which is good. Take a look at the piece that I had just cut out. So this is big enough to make many, many more pictures. So don't throw this away. Let's see what it looks like on my poster here. Come on, this way. My concern, because I cut 1/4 inch less around the whole thing, is that if I take this mat board and center this, that I'm going to lose the Pike Place market, the writing up top. But that looks pretty good. Oh, let's center it on here. And you'll be able to get a better idea on how this is centered when we flip it over on the back side. But if you look at this, I mean, that looks great like that, I think. And if you take your frame, this is where you start to see how the picture goes together. And I take my frame and I put it on top of that. I think that looks really cool. I think it looks really professional. But we're not done. Have to cut the white mat. Oh, time to, no. Oh no, it's not time to go. We want to cut the white mat. And this is the one that's scary because if this one doesn't work out, the issue with this, if it's uneven, we'll probably just get away with using the black mat, even though I don't want to do this. But it's always difficult to make this work out, especially when you have a thin little liner. So this is the side I'm going to see, this white section. So now I'm going to mark it on the back side. So instead of it being 1.5 inches, remember we said we wanted it 1.25 inches this time? So I'll take my combination square. I'm going to line that up to 1.25 inches. I'm going to mark it on the black side. Bop, bop, bop. I'm going to take my pencil. So I'm going to draw it there. Just like I did it on the other one. I draw it here. There. I draw it here. I draw it there. I draw it here. So now I've gone around this whole thing. I've marked out that 1.25 inches around everything, so I'm going to make this a little bit larger. I'll butt this up against here, try to even that out with my line in my corner. I'll do the same thing here. And again, I'm just doing that to tell myself where to stop and where to start. The best thing about this machine, that little mat cutter, or that big mat cutter, is that when I slide that adjustment over, I'm taking all the human mistake out of it. If you are cutting this by hand, and if you slip with the edge that you're butting up against your cutter, the mat looks like the road to Morocco. So we don't want to do that. What do you think the question should be this time? Should it be something about mat board? Well, since everybody doesn't have one of these cutters, I don't think it has to do, it should go with the cutter. How about this? How deep should your rabbit be if you are going to put in 3 pieces of mat board, a piece of glass, a piece of cardboard, and a picture? 3 pieces of mat. If I go 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, the cardboard I have to allow about 1/4 inch for it. The picture's nominal, and the glass. So if I go 1/4 plus 3/8, 1/4 plus 3/8, 1/4 plus 3/8 is 2/8, 5/8, 1/8 inch for the glass. I have to allow a minimum of 3/4 inch if I'm putting in 3 pieces of mat board, a piece of glass, a backer board, and my picture. And what do I mean by that? I think, is that my son's frame? I hope. This depth has to be at least 3/4 inch if I'm going to put all that stuff in. And if you notice, mine's about 1/2 inch. What I'm going to squeeze in the glass, the 2 pieces of mat board, and hopefully I can use the backer board for that. All right, let's cut my white mat board. We'll say a prayer and hopefully that works out. The good part about this is this usually is pretty quick. Again, I'll butt it up against the mat board. Oops, the adjustment that I have to make now, remember, this was set at 1.5 inches. I'm going to move it into 1.25 inches. I guess it's not important to know how to read a ruler, right, Jackson? Oh, yeah, you'll get by, right? Yeah, okay. When pigs fly, that's when you'll get by. So there's the 1.25 inches. It's on the yellow line. Now when I take my mat board and butt it up against here, again, it's the same amount off as it was before. So this might not register quite right, or it's registering to the beginning of this line. Just as long as it's consistent, that's all I care about. Remember what I did the last time. This is where I started, and I want to go a little bit past. A little bit past. Remember, this is the side I'm going to see. This is going to be my field, and that black mat board is going to be the liner. So I'm going to take this, go a little bit past my pencil line. I'm going to squeeze this down right there, and I'll pull it back. Oops, I didn't adjust this measurement. That stopped. So let me slide this over. So you are getting all the mistakes. I'm going to go past the line a little bit. So right here is where I want it to stop. Notice how I move the stop and it now makes contact with the cutter. So there's my first cut. I'll zip around. Again, I'm doing it clockwise because I don't want to screw up. Go past the line just a little bit. If you cut out a lot of mat board, it's definitely worth getting this. A cutter like this, because it's so accurate. If you are one of those occasional, maybe I'll make a mat because it looks good on my picture, I don't know that it's worth it. But for the work that we do in our shop, it definitely is. Because we have tons of people who frame their graduation pictures or prom picture or an athletic picture. So there's my cut. Remember, I'm using the white side now. So that's going to go on the outside. It should go over top of the black mat board, that liner. I'll put this aside. Now I'm going to say a prayer. Oh boy, I hope this fits. So if I look at that picture right there, and we want this to be a consistent space around the entire liner. So I take the black and I put that underneath the white. Now I'm going to slide this up, and the tricky part is going to be centering it. But if you notice that that line looks pretty consistent all the way around, it's going to take a little bit of fudging. That looks a little bit off there. But that's the way I want it to go. So if you look at that, that really does stand out pretty well. Now the $10,000 question, what's it going to look like when I put this frame on, my finished frame? So I'll take my frame, just lay that on there, and that's going to be my finished picture. And I think that looks pretty nice. I think that's a great way to end today. What we'll do is we'll pick up cutting glass maybe the next time. Not sure if I'm going to get to that today. But we'll cut a piece of glass, then we'll put our whole sandwich together. We'll wax the frame, get that ready, put on the backer board. We'll attach the picture to the black mat. That's how it's going to go. And we'll attach the white mat to the black one. We'll cut a piece of glass, put everything together, and maybe this whole thing will be done. All right? You guys have a great day. Good luck. And I can't stress to you enough that you have to know how to read a ruler to do any of this stuff. It's great to be a woodworker, but if somebody else is setting up your machines or figuring out, again, the thinking is the hard part, somebody else is doing that, then you're not doing your job. You have to make the commitment to learn how to speak and then learn how to read a ruler first, okay? You guys have a great day, and I'll be back in touch.